Hello, Chloe. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And hello to everyone who's watching. This is an In Conversation with session with myself, Araba Ofori-Acquah, and the wonderful Chloé Pierre. Um, just as a quick intro, the reason I thought it would be nice for us, Chloe, to do this session is because we both earlier this year have published books on wellness, and both of them specifically for the Black community. Um, so yeah, I just thought it'd be really informative and also great for us to disconnect and talk a little bit about everything, about our book journey, about the content of the book, about wellness in the Black community. So I'm gonna actually just dive straight in and ask you the first question. So you can maybe introduce your book a little bit more, and then I'd love to discuss with you why it's even necessary for us to have written these books on wellness for the Black community. Like, why do we need them?
Yeah, so one, thank you for having me. Two, I love your book. It brings me peace every night, and I'm almost savoring it. As much as I want to get to the end, I'm savoring it. And it's really nice to have a book written by someone like yourself that I can really relate to, and that I feel as if I'm learning, because I guess my role is carving out a niche in an industry which hasn't been seen before. And I've always been the first one to do something. So it's trying to diversify the wellness industry and trying to, give credit back where it's due. And by doing that, it means that I can't, I rarely feel as if I'm learning. I feel as if I'm more doing. So your book is giving me that much needed respite to not only just stop, preserve myself, but it's also given me a chance to learn a little bit more. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, for me, why is it so important? Uh, if I'm honest, I wouldn't want to say that there haven't been books out there, but there haven't been books like this on a mainstream level. I love the fact that both of our books go into the reality. We're not just talking about, people's opinions as such. We're talking about real facts, and we're, again, giving credit where credit's due, pulling in the facts that people can actually learn from. And I'm just so grateful for that. And I think it's beautiful to be a part of this. It definitely feels like a movement, and one which is needed, and one from
Yeah,
education as well.
absolutely. And I think, there's a lot of differences between our books, but there's also a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And I think something that struck when I was reading Take Care, so Take Care is specifically for Black women. And, as you say, it is relevant, it's relatable, it's for our generation. But I think, about two chapters in, and I was like, I need to buy a copy of this book for my mum. And I did. I sent it to my mom, and there's definitely things in there that she won't understand. There's references that she won't get, but overall, I just really felt like, oh, there's finally a book on wellness or self-care that will make sense to her. And she's loved it so far. She's loved it. And she's like, oh, everything in this book is just what I needed right now. And I think that's one of the things about both of our books, is that they are wellness books, but they're actually for people who probably never even picked up a wellness book before.
Yeah.
As much as it could also be for the wellness phase and all of that, it's more than a wellness book. I feel like both of our books are really about Black identity and just living as a Black person. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're so needed, because it's hard out here right now. Like, life is hard. And yeah, crazy things are happening. Um, So I think it's really beautiful that we've just, we didn't know each other. We hadn't met. We didn't know about each other's works. And I think it's very telling that both of them came out around the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure when you started writing yours, but I started mine, well, I started the kind of publishing process in 2020 or 2019, so just before the pandemic hit. And then it became even more relevant, So yeah, I love what you said as well, that it's not just for people that are currently in this kind of bubble, this wellness awareness kind of reality. I think that's really important because the wellness industry as it currently stands is very exclusive, and it's been made like that. And so what I like about our books are that, they're fact driven, but they're also relatable and they're easily digestible. So if we're writing books for, specifically for the Black community, I think language is so important. References are so important. Like things that people can hold on to and say, okay, I get that. I can see myself in that, because let's face it, there haven't been things like that. We now have social media platforms and social media personalities that we can relate to, and that's fantastic. But there's so many more areas that need that same input, and publishing is definitely one.
100%. And I feel like also, the wellness industry definitely does cater to a certain demographic, but it's also really interesting that the knowledge that is shared in wellness often pulls from Indigenous people or from communities of color, and then is whitewashed and then sold back to us. But most of the time, you kind of know where that information is coming from. We know that yoga is from India. We know that Buddhism is from Asia. We know that a lot of the shamanic practices are from Indigenous Americans. But when it comes to Africa, it's as if no one has ever had any useful thought on the continent,
But that's perfect. That leans back into the narrative that, we were, typically, just savages, when in fact, we built up huge trade systems that lots of people replicated, medical practices based on things that, our culture, I can't say it's not anyone living currently. But if you go back, it's, where did the Greeks learn how to do, medicine? But no one wants to have that discussion.
And I think that's what's so important about both of our books. My book, Return to Source, is, that's very much what the book is. It is very much, I am taking you to the traditions and the wisdom of our ancestors. And your book, Take Care, is, I think, it's like a more modern guide to self-care, and yet still so many of the things that you mentioned, you're able to relate back to our traditions and to our cultures. And I think that's so important, because it would be very easy to think as a Black person, my heritage has nothing for me in terms of wellness and spirituality. It would be very easy to think that. And what I love about both of our books is that it shows that you don't have to go into an African traditional religion, you don't have to go into African spirituality, but even just thinking about wellness, full stop, not even spirituality, there are so many things in our lineage that we can learn from, especially in the chapter on grief that you were talking about. Some of the grief rituals that we do that we don't even think about where they came from, and, seeing how similar they are across different Black communities as well. I just think it's a really beautiful opportunity for people to feel more connected to their heritage whilst practicing wellness, which I think is something that we haven't really thought about before. We know we have great food, we have wonderful dances and clothes and things like that, but a lot of the time our people don't think like, oh, let me see what wellness practices my ancestors were doing.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's been a really insightful journey for me, and you know, having your book come into my life after writing the process, like I said, it does feel like relief, but it brings me closer. And, you know, you've literally done the homework. You know, I've spoken to people and, you know, I've done so much as I can from where I was, you know, using the internet. But I love the fact that, you know, you took that leap and you decided to go back to Africa to find out what things mean, to experience things and kind of break down fantasies, which I think a lot of people across the diaspora almost hold on to. Like, it's almost a fantasy, and it's almost quite scary to think, do we have to go back home to feel like ourselves again? And the truth is that you can do that. And I love what you said, that you can do that, but that might not be the answer, you know?
Absolutely. And I think this is such an important point, because we're in a space now where there is this yearning to go back home, whether it's physically or mentally, emotionally, whatever it is. And there's this rhetoric that I think we really need to challenge, that says that, you know, anyone who is Black and is, you know, interested in reclaiming their heritage or interested in Black liberation has to go back to Africa. And I think that's a ridiculous thing to say, to be honest, and it's a very privileged thing to say.
Yeah.
Because, you know, first of all, the act of physically traveling is not available and accessible to everyone. So how can you tell a Black person that if they can't afford or don't have the resources or the support to go to Africa, then they can't complete their homecoming or their liberation? That makes no sense. But also, I think it's really important that we recognize the incredible work of our ancestors who were never on the continent, but managed to keep traditions alive. You know, when we look at the culture of Haiti, for example, you know, if you're Haitian, you don't need to go back to Africa. Like, it's so well preserved. And when we look at diasporic religions like Santeria, Candomblé, things like that, again, all of these traditions and beliefs and spiritual practices that are rooted in the continent have been so well preserved and adapted, yes, to fit the community and the context they're in. So I think it's really important that we recognize that every Black person's homecoming journey is going to be different. And for some people, it will very much connect to the continent, but it doesn't have to. You know, it doesn't even have to connect to Haiti or wherever. It can be, you know, you can be a Black British person in London and have your whole homecoming journey to your heritage be based in London. You know, it can be about connecting with your Black community, connecting with your food, connecting with Black British culture. So I think it's really important that, as excited as we all are about this African Renaissance, I think it's important that we leave room for it to look different for different people.
Definitely. It's so beautifully said. I think my goal is for people to, you know, question their thoughts and their yearnings and all of those feelings that they have, because what they might come up with is that it's a longing, it's a feeling of wanting to belong and a feeling of safety. But again, like you said, that doesn't mean that we are going to be safe on the continent. It doesn't mean that we're going to feel like we belong on the continent. We have to find a way of doing that elsewhere, because yes, privilege plays a part in it. And the truth of the matter is that, you know, everywhere is practically colonized. You know, a real highlight and what I found quite depressing at one stage, which I mentioned in the book, you might remember, is that I question myself quite often over the last few years, like, where is it safe to be Black? And the truth is, it's everywhere and nowhere. So once we come to grips with that, and we realize that our safety is actually in the community and in ourselves and in our mental health and our wellness, then maybe just maybe we might we might feel safer, we might feel like we belong, and that could be anywhere and at any one time.
Exactly. And I think that's a real big shift for me personally as well, where I was definitely searching for belonging outside of myself. And, you know, moving to back to Ghana, which is, you know, I'm Ghanaian. But then I came to Ghana and people were like, oh, you're British. And I was like, excuse me? And then in Britain, I'm like, it's like, oh, where are you from? So I remember like at first it used to really get to me, like taxi drivers and stuff would be like, oh, but where are you from? You're not Ghanaian. I'd be like, yeah, I'm Ghanaian. They'd be like, no, 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 where are you from? And I'm like, why won't anyone believe me? And I talk about this a bit in the book as well. I think the big shift for me was exactly what you say. Belonging actually isn't something that we get from outside of ourselves. It's not even something that your community can give you if you don't give it to yourself. So once I understood what my identity is as a British Ghanaian woman, you know, now someone could still say, oh, you're not Ghanaian. And it's just a joke. Like, I'll just laugh with them and explain, like, maybe I'll explain, maybe I won't. But it doesn't hurt me in the same way because I've got that sense of belonging from within, from connecting with my ancestry, connecting with spirit. And I think that's a really important shift for us as Black people, because I feel that this quest for belonging often puts us in really unsafe situations or unproductive situations. So if we can start to understand belonging as something that comes from within, not to say that there's no room for community, the community is so important. But I think once we can start to create our own feeling of belonging and be strong in our own sense of self, then I think that ripples into all other areas and prevents us from doing things that don't feel good and from going into spaces that don't feel good.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you're saying. I almost like, it's, you know, like reading the book, I get goosebumps because as much as a lot of people kind of say these things, like you're living it, you've done the work, you've done, you know, work for yourself essentially. And it's just really inspiring to see. So yeah, definitely got goosebumps.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I actually want to rewind a little bit and talk about the book writing process. One of the things I love about your book actually is just how honest you are and how open you are about some of the challenges that you had to overcome to even get this book out there. But yeah, you mentioned earlier that you started writing in 2019 or 2020. So I started writing in 2020 as well. And funnily enough, I think it affected us in different ways, where you started writing and then the pandemic hit. So that informed your writing. Whereas I started writing when the pandemic was already here. And I was like, okay, I'm projecting myself into the future where this pandemic isn't a thing anymore. But like, we're still unsafe and unwell as Black people. So I'm just going to write it kind of ignoring the pandemic in a way. So yeah, I would just love to know a bit more about how the experience was for you, the writing experience, what your process was like. I'm sure we have a lot of people watching this who maybe know that they have a book within them as well. So maybe even down to like the practical side of like how do you even write a book?
Yeah. So I guess in hindsight, so I can speak from this point of view. So in hindsight, I possibly would have created the pitch and wrote some, if not most of the book before speaking to a publisher or before the due date. There's two ways to publish. There's self-publishing and then there's going through, a traditional publishing house. They both have their pros and cons. I struggled because I felt, and I definitely, in hindsight, I definitely feel like a number. I do feel as if I did this from the heart. And when I say that, and I say that in the book, it was so taxing because I was writing during the pandemic. with a whole load of trauma going on, being pregnant as well. There's so much that happened. I always say there's nothing that I haven't been through. The pandemic, a pregnancy, abuse, death, all of that happened in that space of time. Global phenomenon. So that, I'm like, what else could I possibly have missed? So knowing that, I think maybe just respecting my own existence and position with that would have been much more comforting. I maybe wouldn't have felt so rushed. There might have been more opportunities to elaborate further. Even I had some feedback last week, and someone said it would have been nicer if you shared more of your personal experience. And I thought, wow, I literally did share my personal experience on there, but I guess it's how you read it. I think I did go in there, but to some degree I was protecting a lot of people that have hurt me. So I didn't want to necessarily name and shame, but I definitely think I did as much as I could. And within that whole process, I think I did as much as I could, and I did it with the best intention. But if I was to do it now, I possibly would really think of the concept, write the book to as much of its entirety as possible, and then go about publishing it, or, having that kind of disclaimer when working with a publisher. I will also say, because of the type of book that I was writing and trying to research facts to, prove my points and maybe prove other people's points as well and other opinions, was really difficult, mainly because there's not a lot of information out there. So that process was quite difficult, and I maybe wish that I had a little bit more time to do that, because research in itself is just an intensive part of the process if that's the type of book that you're writing. And you'll always find that once you start writing, you think you might have an idea, and then you're looking for something else to back it up, because essentially you can't throw random opinions out there without backing it up, unless you're someone like Piers Morgan or Donald Trump, who can do that. Like, as a Black woman, you definitely don't have the same privilege. People aren't so kind to us, let's just say it like that. So and maybe that was part of my own insecurities, but I felt as if I had to, because how serious this book is, how much I want this book to live throughout the ages, for people to be able to look back at it in 20 years time, 50 years time, and say, I understand what she was saying. That's what she said in 2020 or 2023. Where are we now? Rather than baseless and senseless, I guess, rhetoric.
Absolutely. That's okay. I'm going to respond to both of those points separately. That's really interesting feedback about you putting more of yourself in the book, because when I read it, I felt that it was very vulnerable, and I felt that you shared a lot, actually. So yeah, I guess it depends from what point the reader is reading it from, maybe. And there's always room to go deeper, right? There's always room to go deeper, but even just writing nonfiction full stop is so, you're just bearing all, even if you don't talk about personal stories, your personality and who you are and your views come through in the way that you write. So I thought you included quite a lot of your personal journey, and that's one of the things that I really appreciated about the book. So yeah, that's an interesting feedback point. About the research, girl, when I finished this book, I was like, I should do a master's, because I've basically just done a master's. It was a lot. It was a lot, exactly as you said. And I think because of the topic we're writing on as well, there isn't enough research, and it's just that whole thing of second guessing yourself, where you like write something and then you're like, okay, but like, is this really true? Did I make it up? And then you have to go and find some research to back up. And sometimes the research isn't even there. So then you have to change how you word it. And it's simply because, you know, just like with everything to do with Black people, you know, it just hasn't been given the same attention. So there isn't the same resources, which is even the reason we wrote our books, right?
So there's not enough leeway for like failure. You know, one of my biggest fears was that someone was just going to come at me, and I haven't had many people come at me just in general in my career, but there are people out there that want to argue with you about your own experiences and things that you know as facts without someone offering loads of money to make, to get the research behind it. And that was my fear. So that's why I did that kind of work. And like you said, if you don't find it, then it's almost like, God, I practically have to take it out, you know?
Yeah. And it's definitely this thing with like, oh, but like, if I say this, is someone going to get angry? And I think part of it is, unfortunately, as Black people, every time we speak, we're speaking for all Black people, basically. And, you know, it's this thing of being minoritized where, you know, if some white lady wrote a book and made wild claims in it, or like said things about her experience, no one would come out and be like, oh, but that's not every white woman's experience. You know, as I was launching the book, actually, a friend of mine, a Black friend of mine, told me that her white friend had said to her, oh, the book looks interesting, but like, I just don't think it makes sense to write a book for Black people, because how can she know every Black person's experience? And I was just like, what? Like, would you say this? Like, do you say this about all the millions of wellness books written from the perspective of a white woman? Do you say, oh, but how can she know all of our experiences? Why are you, as a white woman, policing my book? And also, how insulting that you think I've written a book and haven't considered other Black people's experiences. Like, it's so patronizing. But then at the same time, as you write, I don't know if you experienced this, but, you know, especially writing as a Black British person, but not just Black British, also British Ghanaian, and knowing that's a very specific experience, I also always had in my mind, okay, but how, like, what does this sound like to someone who's African American? What does this sound like to someone who's Caribbean? And I always wanted to, I actually reread the book a few times, and I was like, okay, today I'm reading as a Caribbean person. And I wanted to make sure that there was nothing where I generalized a Black experience that didn't relate to them, or if I ever shared an experience that was very much a British experience, you know, I kind of caveated that in the beginning of the book and said, you know, I'm writing from this experience. But, you know, all of that extra, I don't even know what to call it, pressure, I guess, is just, again, it's just so typical of being a Black woman. And it definitely adds a layer of anxiety, actually, to the book writing process and the publishing process.
I'm so glad you pulled that up. Sometimes I think I'm so traumatized by the whole book writing process that it's not that I forget things, but I just like keep it to the back. But definitely that, exactly what you said. And there were so many parts of the book that you know, it's like you have to reiterate that message that, again, this is my experience. I'm speaking from this lens. Because likewise, you know, I've been told that I'm a British Caribbean person, and that's the identity that I've lived with and I'm most comfortable with, Black, British, Caribbean. But I had to look at it from so many different lenses, and, you know, I wouldn't dare say that I spoke for everyone. Absolutely not. The goal with this book was to speak and allow other people to feel as if they could do the same. And there's so many parts of the book that if I don't say that explicitly, then, you know, anyone with a certain awareness will realize that You know, if I could do this, you could do this. Let's have more of it in the world. You know, all of the exercises where we reflect on the chapters and the questions I asked you in the book, that it's meant for that person, that specific reason and that purpose. It's for you to come away with your own ideas and to hopefully add to this pot. You know, it's great that we both wrote this book, and, you know, we have to think about maybe why we wrote it and what places, you know, in our lives we were. But, you know, the basis of this and my thought behind it is that hopefully it will inspire other people to write more books. You know, it's hard enough to find books from the past that we can connect with. So what we're doing is trying to do that now, I believe. And
Yeah,
the more the merrier, you know?
absolutely. And that's exactly the word, inspiration. You know, I definitely felt the same when I was writing my book. It was, I want to share as much information and as many shared experiences as possible, as a way to inspire people to create their own wellness practice, or to look into their own heritage, or to create their own homecoming journey, you know. And I think I wrote this at the end of the book as well, that even though this book is written to Black people, I would love for everyone to read it and to gain some form of inspiration from it. Because, you know, if you're, I don't know, Eastern European and you read my book, I'm confident that there are things in there that I'll be saying, in traditional African societies, we did this, we did that. And you'll be like, oh, my grandma told me about this as well. And that's what I really want. You know, obviously my focus is Black people, but I think collectively, if all of us connected more with our culture, more with our heritage, more with pre-colonial values, I think that we'd all be better off, and the world would be a much friendlier place.
Exactly. And I just would love for people to just have that kind of openness. I've been told, I can't even tell you the amount of times that I've been told, oh, well done, which sounds a little bit patronizing. Well done for writing a book. I would love to read it. However, I'm not a Black woman. So, you know, and it's like the audacity, let's just keep it as that. And I say this not to be offensive, but just to be very honest and very blunt. I had Anne Frank pushed down my throat since I was a child without permission, without consent. That has made me the person I am today. It's made me a well-rounded person. But why isn't that open to everyone? Why are we not all given access to, you know, Roots and books like that can sharpen everyone's knowledge about every possible culture and heritage and type of person that has once lived on the planet? Why are there not, you know, more books given and read in the curriculums across the world about different cultures, about indigenous cultures? Like, why? It's because there's so much to hide. But that kind of, again, I'm just going to call it an audacity. That kind of audacity is just ignorant. And I always shut down when I hear things like that now, because it's not my job. And I think sometimes people want to argue, and my job is not to argue. My job is to inspire, and I want to stay in that space. I'm not forcing this book on anyone. If you have that idea, then of course the book's not for you and you're not ready. When you're ready, pick it up, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, I think this is the thing, is I just don't understand why it needs to be explained to you that reading a book about another culture could be a good thing. I mean, it's really wild to me. And what's even stranger is that I've heard people say it about fiction, about like African fiction. It's like, oh, but it's not for me. And I'm just thinking, you know, I grew up reading like Jacqueline Wilson, Nancy Drew. Like, there were like no Black people unless it was Mallory Blackman's books. Those were the only ones. And it's just so interesting, the, you know, trying to put your mind in the space of a dominant demographic, because I just can't get my head around it. And I just think, wow, what a nice life that until now you've never even had to consider reading a book that didn't send to you. That
point where you're offended or insulted that a different way of living and existing and intelligence could even be suggested. Why?
Yeah, and offended that it's not written in a way that purposefully invites you in.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't like the ridicule that comes with it as well, is that, it's almost ridiculed. It's like, well, prove it. But no one had to prove your existence. No one had to prove other existences that are mainstream. Yeah.
So actually that brings us nicely onto my next question, which is this idea of decolonizing wellness. The word decolonize, in my opinion, has been completely overused and just thrown into things that you can't even decolonize. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But, I think it's an easy way of communicating meaning. People understand what you mean when you say that. So if we talk about decolonizing wellness, what does that actually mean for you?
So for me, what decolonizing wellness essentially, and I like to speak in a way that everyone can understand, that I'm not trying to overcomplicate anything. That's some of the issues that people face when accessing self-help wellness, all the things that should be everyday and accessible to everyone. I'm just not about to do that. So if I say it in the most, easily understood way, decolonizing wellness is to be aware of our concepts around it, to understand our starting points, to really see it for what it is, and also to see where it's been appropriated, to see which lens we've been accessing it from, and to challenge that. Decolonizing, in my mind, is less of a fight and more of a challenge. I think a lot of people tend to think of anything which isn't the standard, which has been set by people that I don't know and societies that I don't necessarily agree with, as a fight. But it's more of a challenge. A challenge is respectful. A challenge is something that should be discussed openly. And that's what I think decolonizing means to me. And that can work for so many different industries, and as it should, because people do need to start challenging the way in which we live, the way that we've been told things, the way that we've been made to think. I'm not a robot. I don't plan on raising a robot. And sometimes, part of this challenge is having to stand up, and not for my own personal gain. In fact, it's probably quite taxing to do the job that I do. It's taxing to do what you do. It's taxing to not just do it, but then to be able to package it and share it to the world. So for me, all of that encompasses what decolonizing an industry, a concept is. And as much as I maybe started it off doing it for myself, it's for the greater good. So if I'm honest, would I be prepared to die for this concept? Yeah, because I believe in it that much. Whereas I don't think everyone or many others can say that. That's how it means to me, and that's how important it is to me.
Yeah, I absolutely love that that idea of thinking of it as a challenge instead of a fight. I think for me, the word decolonize is complex, Um, but I really believe that the work of decolonizing is something that is for um, Indigenous and people of color. I don't think it's something that we should be telling Western institutions that they need to decolonize, because they can't decolonize because they're literally rooted in coloniality. Like, it doesn't make any sense. If they were to decolonize, they just wouldn't exist. So for me, decolonizing is something that is very personal to each individual person of color, Indigenous person from a community that has been colonized, and then is something that we need to do as a community as well. My challenge with the idea of decolonization is when it comes up in the context of, things that are, they're just colonial. That's just how they are. So instead of trying to fix these things, these institutions, there's definitely work that needs to be done in the institutions, diversification, all of that kind of thing. But when it comes to decolonizing, I almost feel like we are misplacing our priorities if we focus so much on decolonizing Western institutions instead of decolonizing ourselves and our minds and our approach to things, which would then, if we were to do that, that would then lead to us actually spending that energy on building up our communities and investing in Black businesses, investing in decolonial initiatives run by Indigenous and people of color. So when I think about decolonizing wellness, I think some people might think, oh, it means you can only do African things, which makes no sense to me. Or some people might think it's like, oh, we're going to teach yoga, but we're going to make it African yoga. And I think that really it's not even about the individual actions. It's not about whether you're doing yoga or drumming or whatever. It comes back to that decolonial mindset and reconnecting with African values of community and connecting with nature and, just living in harmony with each other and with the environment around us. So that could very well be a yoga class, It could very well be something that on the surface isn't Black, but it being done in a decolonized way means, that it's an inviting space for people of color. It's something that has a positive impact on the environment around us. It's something that's not rooted in capitalism. So I think whenever I see decolonizing wellness or decolonizing yoga or whatever, I'm always a bit skeptical. But really, I think the basis of the work is just us building community and finding wellness as individuals within that community.
100%. I think you did a really good job of explaining that, and also just leading on from what I said as well. I love that. Was almost what I used to say, and I have said that I think in the book as well. It's not about asking people for their approval. I didn't actually see that as decolonization, but that is essentially what it is. It's not asking people to change their mindset, it's living by that example.
Exactly that. Because when you think of decolonizing as oh, can you please do this? Can you please do that? We're still centering white supremacy.
Yes.
And we're still upholding this paternalistic patriarchal system that they've put us in, And again, I definitely don't want to take away from any work that is focused on restructuring these institutions and things like that. It's very important work. It's just not colonization work. And I think it's important that we don't dilute that word to a point where it loses its meaning.
100%. And that can go for a lot of different words as well. Different terminologies that are now very, culture, pop culture, and just overused. And it's always they desensitize what the meaning. So, yeah.
Definitely. This is on a slightly different topic, but that's come up recently with therapy speak because of what happened with the man, Kiki Palmer's boyfriend and someone else's boyfriend. um,
Yeah.
use like therapy speak on them, but actually as a form of control.
Yeah.
It's really got me thinking that, you know, so much of this stuff is such a double-edged sword. It's really amazing that more and more people have access um, to mental health information, to, you know, therapy resources, because therapy is expensive and it's not accessible to everyone. But the other edge of that sword is that, you know, often people don't actually understand the truth of these things, these words, like whether it's boundaries, gaslighting, abuse. You know, if it's watered down and overused so much, then yeah, people just don't actually know what they're talking about, and that can create quite dangerous situations.
And also the way they use it for their own personal gain. I think, you know, wellness to me is understanding, you know, how, you know, our output, the power in our thinking, the power in our speech, the power in what we do. So yeah, if we're using something to disempower someone else or to, you know, use something for personal gain, then I don't believe that is wellness. That can't be wellness. You know, wellness, you know, if we look at the basis of like the letters, you know, it's about we. That's why I always relate it back to community. So it can't be used for personal gain. It can be used for personal enrichment, but that's very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that Western wellness does well, where it somehow spins this lie that by you focusing only on yourself and achieving enlightenment, you're actually doing something good for other people because you're raising the collective consciousness. That's one of my least favorite phrases, because it's just so individualistic and entirely false. You know, this idea that you can completely disengage from the world around you, but then because you're on the path of enlightenment, you're actually doing good for your fellow humans, I think it's just ridiculous, to be honest.
No, it's definitely warped. It's a warped way of thinking. And again, it's just based in supremacy of all different types, you know, but essentially it's still leaning into white supremacy. It's about control, and that's what we understand. It's about domination.
Yeah, definitely. So we're running out of time, sadly. I have a couple more questions I want to ask. So I would love to know, your book came out in January, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So how has life changed since then, if it has?
I definitely would say my boundaries have been readjusted about what I'm happy to speak about, in terms of the energy that I pour into certain conversations. Now having the book there, it's almost like instead of me having to say things over and over again, I have material that I can push. And it's almost like a boundary. It's like, well, I'm not willing to speak about it. However, if you read my book, then, you know, you'll get my opinion that way. You know, I definitely think, you know, the press has been amazing. But sometimes I feel as if, you know, it just leans into everything that I'm kind of fighting against sometimes. Tokenism, thinking of wellness as a trend, you know, it's, you know, yeah, I sometimes think it's a little bit insulting, but on the flip side, maybe some positives is that I feel as if it has helped a few people already. You know, you explaining that you read it and you thought, I need to give this to my mum. I'm so honored to say that that's not the first time I've heard that. And that's really heartwarming. It feels as if all of that trauma that I said I went through to write the book is for a reason. if I feel as if the publishing process or the proposal was tokenized, at least that isn't. And that Black women, people, can feel seen and know that there is not just hope, but there's facts that prove a lot of things. And that they don't need to keep on validating their experiences, their thought processes. I think hopefully reading the book, people can feel like that.
Yeah. And I think that battle between the pros and the cons is something that is unfortunately inescapable if you want to participate in any kind of industry, really. Because at the end of the day, we do live in a society where it's the Western powers who have the power. So, you know, when it comes to publishing a book, you know, I'm sure similarly for me, I knew that I wanted this book to reach as many Black people as possible. Now, if I were publishing purely based on like an idealized view of the world, I probably would have published with an African publisher, with a Black-owned publisher. But I knew that the reach that I wanted and for the audience that I wanted to target, perhaps was a private publisher.
Yeah.
And, you know, in some ways that might seem like a misalignment of values, but it's just something that is part of being Black in this world and trying to make impact.
And the way I see it is that is actually is strategic. And, you know, being strategic, especially as, you know, someone that identifies as being Black or a person of color, is smart. And, you know, to some degree, we need to utilize that more. We don't need to see that as being, you know, white. We need to see it as for what it is. It's a political move. It's and it's necessary to make change sometimes.
Yeah, and you know, there's definitely a line. You know, I was really blessed in that Hay House were just so supportive of everything I wanted to do. You know, from the very beginning, I said that I wanted to make sure that, you know, all the major people involved in the book, my editor, my illustrator, were all Black people.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, people of color. And, you know, they very easily could have been like, oh, well, we don't have anyone. Deal with it, or go take your book somewhere else. But, you know, they got a Black editor who was amazing. We ran a competition to find an illustrator. He didn't actually end up being able to do the cover, but he did the work for us. And, you know, that's also still paying it forward in getting him his first big contract or publishing house. And then the lady who ended up doing the cover design was a woman of color. So I think, yes, we do have to be strategic, but we also have to remember that we can still bring our values along with us. You know, we can ask, because I could have been scared I was scared to ask, but I could have never asked Take House, oh, I want like, and if I hadn't asked, I probably wouldn't have got it. So yeah, I think definitely we need to, as you say, utilize that strategic thinking more. But we also need to cut ourselves some slack and not see it as selling out, because there's other things that we can do to make sure that we're still benefiting our community however we can.
I would really like us to stop looking at certain things as selling out, and to stop judging each other with questions about how enough we are, how much we identify with certain stereotypes and narratives. You know, I look forward to that day, hopefully, or at least being a catalyst for that as well.
So, okay, we have both published a book this year, which is a really big thing. Yeah, I don't know about you, but after I published, I was just exhausted.
Oh my God, yes. I'm still exhausted.
was so exhausted. I had visions of like, doing a book tour, traveling, and just doing all these things.
Doing that. I thought you were doing that.
My visions were a bit more grandiose than what I've done, ever the perfectionist. I have been doing a podcast tour, and I'm planning to do some in-person events for Black History Month. Just a planning phase for those at the moment. But yeah, I was just exhausted, and I honestly was also tired of the book. Like, I was really happy that it was out, and I was really proud of it and everything. But like, I don't know why I had a vision of myself like reading my book after it was out. And I absolutely did not. I have not read it again. I've read this book like so many times in the actual publishing process. But I haven't read a physical copy since it came out. So now, as I think about what's next for me, I almost feel like I want to do almost like a relaunch and do all of that stuff that I didn't have the energy for before. Especially, as we come up to Black History Month, which is so often focused on Black trauma, it would be nice to do some stuff focused on Black joy and community and wellness. So yeah, my what's next very much looks like, okay, the hard work of publishing the book is done. Now how can I reinvigorate it and breathe new life into it and bring it to different audiences, and maybe in different ways with more kind of in-person stuff and more experiential experiences. So how about you? What's next for you?
I feel as if we're so aligned. There's a reason why we've been connected at this point of the journey. I truly do believe that, because otherwise I think the both of us would have like sent each other mad. We were speaking about this at the beginning. We probably wouldn't have got to the end point. But like you, I have read the book and I've had to, and I'm not going to go into it just yet because I don't want to get in trouble for like slander or anything. But yeah, I have just, I'm reading over the book now, but I generally have an issue, and I've always kind of done work, and whether that's speaking or, doing podcasts or radio, I never want to listen to it back. I feel as if, I said what I said, that meme and that status is, I said what I said. And as much as I'm always looking to learn from things, I don't need to be pulled up, and I don't need to question myself, because that's probably what we'll do as well. It'll just probably bring about more exhaustion, more imposter syndrome, more self-doubt. So it's just, we've done this now, it is what it is. It's been received in this way. And my goal is to, like you, is to go, like, to hone back in on, what was the vision for thyself before I got pulled and pushed from different directions, working with other people. What was it that I originally wanted to do? What does that work look like? What does actually decolonizing wellness mean? How do we make it more accessible and more inclusive? All the things that we live and breathe. How do we really do it now? So now that the book is out the way, now that I've given birth, now that my son is able to walk and talk and tell me what to do, and that my life seems a little bit more settled, and I have a certain level of freedom back now, I'm getting back to the mission and what I believe is my life purpose. I almost look at it as I'm not finished serving my community and serving my purpose. I think it just needs to take a different turn, and I need to be enriched. At this point, I need to feel more empowered, because I've done a lot of giving, and now it's about bringing that back in. And to me, that looks like learning. That looks like, taking time out. It looks like finding joy again, rather than making sure that other people have that. And that's what it looks like to me. So with myself, we're going to hone back in on our mission, our purpose, our values. It's going to be basically doing all the things that I saw were lacking when I did the research in the book. It's trying to get funding to put into those kind of initiatives. It's about really honing in on not necessarily changing the wellness industry, but doing what we set out to do. So having hard conversations, going back at that, anyone that knew that we was on that path before, like, watch out, we're coming back, basically. You had your time of rest and your, fuckery, to be quite honest, and now we're going to come back. I'm coming back to you. We're going to have those hard-hitting conversations. I want them to be a part of the conversation. I want them to be accountable. Yeah, I'm quite excited because that's what empowered me to create myself. It's that kind of energy, and I didn't have it for a long time because of the book, because of the pandemic, because of abuse, because of, being able to, really understand why I operate in a certain way and what kind of things were in my life that I wasn't really willing to accept and deal with. Yeah. And I'm excited. I feel like me again. And yeah, I'm ready to do the work on myself in a different way.
I love that. And I'm excited to see what all of this looks like. And hopefully to work with you. I feel like
we will. I feel like that's already written in the stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it would just be one project either. I think it's just going to be an ongoing thing, to be honest. Yeah. I'm excited. You actually remind me of someone that I grew up with that is no longer with us, and it's actually really beautiful. Oh yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. And thank you for this conversation. I feel like we could honestly go on for so long. But unfortunately we have to wrap it up. So I think we can just finish by letting people know where they can find us. So a reminder of the title of my book. It is Return to Source, Unlock the Power of African-Centered Wellness. My name is Araba Ofori-Acquah, and the book is available pretty much anywhere you can buy books. I've always wanted to say that since I was a child. And now it's true. So yeah, you can buy it online, Amazon, you can get it at bookstores. I personally would encourage you to go to your local bookstore, especially if it's Black owned. And even if they don't have it, they can order it in for you. You can connect with me on Instagram at araba.oa. That's ARABA.oa. And you'll find pretty much links to everything else from my Instagram. How about you, Chloe? Remind us of your book title and where people can find you.
Yeah, sure. So my book is called Take Care. The headline is It's a Black Woman's Guide to Wellness. But as we said in this conversation, it literally is for everyone. So please pick up a copy. Like Araba, I can also say that it's available everywhere. As I said earlier on the call that, I'm currently in Stoke Newington, and there's an independent bookstore that I used to shop at as a kid and, visit. And to see that book in there, it means a lot to me. It means that, where I grew up, there's a sense of me still there. But as I am now, or as I once was. So it's just beautiful. So yeah, you can find me everywhere. WH Smith, Waterstones, we are international as well. So Take Care sold out of its pre-order in the US. So we are actually on our third reprint of the book. So literally everywhere. So go and get a copy, save it, share it with your friends. The audio version as well is pretty good, if I say so myself, because I did it and it was really nice to be able to speak truth into the words on the page. And yeah, of course, I'm everywhere because that's a part of being in this generation, is that start off on Instagram and you'll find me everywhere. I'm literally just a DM away. I said it in the back of the book as well, is that I want this to be a conversation. So if you have points, even if it's not necessarily what I've spoken about or you want to challenge it, challenge, as I said, is necessary. It's necessary for learning. It's necessary to bringing people together. So I'm always open to a conversation, as long as it's intelligent and it's intentional for the right reasons. I'm open to it. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Beautiful. And is your Instagram, do you want people to contact you on your personal one or
Yeah. Yeah, so you can contact me at Chloé Pierre LDM, which is my personal Instagram. You can do so on Thyself. Obviously, Thyself is a business platform, so it's not necessarily me, but I do have access to it. But yeah, both really.
Great. Thank you. So with that, I guess we will wrap up and say goodbye. But as you just heard, keep an eye out because you'll be seeing us again somewhere on your screens or in your neighborhood. Who knows? Um, Thank you so much for joining, for your engagement, for everything that you shared, and for your book again. Honestly, yeah, I love it, and it was just so nice to be able to give something like that to my mom and for her to really connect with it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.